exclusividade aqui pela TV Antagonista, a transmissão direto da Universidade de Colômbia do discurso da palestra de Sérgio Moro sobre política e corrupção no Brasil, principalmente sobre a Operação Lava Jato. Já chama todos os seus amigos para entrarem aqui na TV Antagonista e no www.youtube.com/oantagonista. É só aqui no Antagonista que você vai ver ao vivo Sérgio Moro falando na Universidade de Colômbia. Neste momento, quem está falando é o provost da Universidade de Colômbia, John Coatsworth, que tem uma ligação muito íntima com o Brasil, é profundo conhecedor da Operação Lava Jato e está fazendo a apresentação, abrindo esse evento que começou com 10 minutos de atraso. Vamos ver um trechinho.
That will help shed light on the complexities of the operation.
Ele está dizendo
from key actors
que
in
eles
this process,
esperam
as well as
que
economic
as
and political
discussões
experts
sejam
from academia,
frutíferas
the private sector,
nos
and
dois
multilateral
próximos
institutions.
dias. Falando tanto sobre a academia quanto o setor privado e as instituições.
And would like to especially extend my gratitude to our three featured guest speakers. The Honorable
Ele está agradecendo
Antunes Rocha, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Brazil, who may join us tomorrow.
Ele está agradecendo a ministra Carmen Lúcia, que fala amanhã.
Who's with us now, and Prosecuting Attorney Paulo Roberto Galvão.
Agradecendo o juiz Sérgio Moro e agradecendo também o procurador da Lava Jato, que deve falar na tarde de hoje.
Finally, a word of thanks to the Lehman Center for Brazilian Studies at Columbia and the Janey Program in Latin American Studies at the New School.
Agora ele está agradecendo à Fundação Lehman e também aos outros patrocinadores desse evento que acontece nesse momento na Universidade de Colômbia. Aproveita e vai avisando todo mundo que você só vai ver a palestra de Sérgio Moro aqui na TV Antagonista. Acabamos de ver a fala de John Coatsworth, provost da Universidade de Colômbia. Esse é o mestre de cerimônia que está
So just a few thank yous before we get started with the program. This was a large undertaking involving many parties and many individuals who helped make this possible. And so, I want to,
Ele está dizendo
the Lehman Center for Brazilian Studies and
que
the Janey
envolveu
Program in Latin
muitas
American
pessoas
Studies
para que
at the
fosse
New School
possível.
were kind of leads in organizing this event, and it's a wonderful partnership
Está
between our
agradecendo todo
universities.
mundo que participou do evento, as outras universidades. Amanhã vai haver uma outra universidade que vai receber esse evento.
Organization and sponsorship of the event. Particularly want to thank the Center on Global Economic Governance at CIPA, the School for International Policy and Public Affairs here at Columbia.
Os indivíduos, as escolas dentro da Universidade de Colômbia, os centros que estão ajudando a receber as pessoas, a organizar, a levar as pessoas até a Universidade de Colômbia.
We also wanted to thank two of our outside sponsors, the Consejo Empresarial de América Latina, who provides some valuable sponsorship for us to be able to host this event.
Isso é tradicional em todos os eventos universitários que acontecem nos Estados Unidos. Eles não só por questão de agradecimento, mas também por questão de transparência do evento, fazem questão de dizer todo mundo que está envolvido, porque aí quem vai assistir sabe exatamente como cada um desses eventos foi organizado. Esse evento na Universidade de Colômbia, na cidade de Nova York, se chama Institution Building, Governance and Compliance in Brazil, Politics, Policy and Business. Construção das instituições, governança e compliance, que seria uma espécie de transparência e prestação de contas no Brasil. Política, políticas públicas e negócios.
We have a wide range of speakers with different professional, disciplinary, and ideological perspectives on the agenda of the two-day conference. Additionally, the conference purposely includes multiple opportunities for audience
conferencistas com visões bastante diferentes, tanto do ponto de vista ideológico quanto do ponto de vista de experiência profissional.
The program will continue with a slightly different focus. So our intention is to create a space to hear diverse perspectives on the implications of the Lava Jato, and we welcome critical questions from the audience for our speakers and panelists.
Ele diz que o intuito do evento é criar uma discussão de várias perspectivas diferentes sobre os efeitos da Lava Jato e motivar questionamentos interessantes. E não se quer privilegiar nenhum tipo de visão sobre outra.
Knows that we have always hosted visitors and organized public events involving scholars and public figures with a wide range of political leanings, and will continue to do so. So our doors are open to discuss ideas for future initiatives and that help shed light on the complex social, economic, and political issues facing Brazil. With that, I'll turn the program over to Felipe Ramos, who the initial idea for this event and the main role in constructing the agenda is owed to Felipe Ramos, Luis Pinto, and Leonardo Petronilla. And Felipe will lead the next part of the section. Felipe is a sociologist, PhD student at the New School, and he has an MA in sociology from the Federal University of Bahia, and he has experience working in the private sector, but also in government in Brazil. So with that, I call Felipe up to the stage. Thank you very much.
Está chamando estudioso brasileiro, sociólogo, Felipe Ramos, para falar neste momento na abertura desse evento. É dos organizadores, junto com Leonardo Petronilla, da Universidade de Colômbia também.
To make this event possible. I think it would be wonderful to have such authorities here and to discuss.
Está agradecendo, dizendo que ele acha que é ótimo ter essas autoridades ali para poder discutir a Operação Lava Jato.
Accepting this joint effort. They told me that it's necessary to have some introduction to the federal judge Sérgio Moro. And I think it's not that very necessary because I think everyone here knows him very well. But
Ele falou que disseram que precisava apresentar o juiz Sérgio Moro, mas ele acha que, na verdade, não precisa apresentar o juiz Sérgio Moro, porque todo mundo conhece ele muito bem. Mas ainda assim, ele vai fazer algumas apresentações usando a imprensa norte-americana. Começou com o Washington Post falando que Sérgio Moro é um novo herói brasileiro.
Sérgio Moro is just a judge, albeit one prosecuting a corruption scandal so huge it could perhaps change a culture of graft that has long hobbled his country's progress.
Aí depois comparou com a Time Magazine. Sérgio Moro é apenas um juiz, mas ele está investigando um caso de corrupção tão grande que pode ser que mude o Brasil. E agora sim o momento que a gente esperava. Juiz Sérgio Moro, aplaudidíssimo, está subindo para falar com a plateia deste seminário na Universidade de Colômbia. Você só vê aqui na TV antagonista. Nesse momento, ele no púlpito assume ali os microfones.
Well, let me start. No, after. Okay. Well, well,
Thank you. I want to remind those who are present that there will be ample opportunity to pose questions both to Judge Moro and to the panelists who will follow him. So it's not necessary to shout out now. There will be ample opportunity to step to the microphone and ask questions later on. Thank you all for your patience.
well, tomorrow, the federal prosecutor, Paulo Galvão, will speak, and I ask that you reserve the protest for his presentation. Oh, sorry for that. Some people have passions, and we have to understand sometimes. But I just want to thank the Columbia University and the New School for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak here. It's an honor and a pleasure. I am especially grateful for the generous hospitality I received here from Professors Gustavo Azenha, Marcos Trodio, Felipe Ramos, and Leonardo Petronilla. And also grateful for the calorous hospitality of the audience. Well, I was invited here because of my work as a judge in Brazil in this so-called Lava Jato operation. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with the case, so I prepared some remarks to explain Lava Jato operation. But more important than this case, I think it's possible to extract some lessons from this criminal case that could be used in other scenarios. Let me say first that since the beginning, I see the case as a great opportunity to reinforce the rule of law in Brazil. The expression rule of law has an ancient history and several meanings. The idea could be traced back to Aristotle, who argued in politics that it's better for the law to rule than one of the citizens. Despite the debate about the meaning of the rule of law, there is a common understanding that one of it is that no one is above the law. A.V. Dicey, in his book An Introduction to the Study of the Law of the Constitution, published in 1885 stated that when we speak of the rule of law as a characteristic of our country, he was speaking about, at his time, Britain, not only that with us no man is above the law, but, which is a different thing, that here every man, whatever be his rank or condition, is subject to the ordinary law of the realm and amenable to the jurisdiction of the ordinary tribunals. Brazil does not have a strong tradition in the enforcement of the law against crimes committed by powerful politicians or businessmen. This undermined the rule of law for a long time in Brazil. Probably this is one of the reasons of the development of a scenario of systemic corruption in Brazil, as revealed by the cases already tried in Lava Jato operation. However, as the Lava Jato operation revealed several cases of bribery, and as some of these cases are finding reasonable institutional answers in Brazilian courts of justice, the whole case became a great opportunity to change a past of impunity for crimes committed by powerful people and to introduce real accountability for serious criminal behavior. Let me say just a few words about Brazilian criminal justice. Sharing some information about it will help you understand later Lava Jato operation. As I already said, Brazilian criminal justice does not work as a rule very well in complex cases, especially in white-collar crimes, including bribery and money laundering. I think there is two main reasons. First, the slowness of the whole judicial process. There are a lot of cases, of course, for that slowness, but one is our criminal procedure. For example, until recently, in Brazil, the enforcement of a criminal conviction was possible only after the case reached a final decision that could no longer be appealed. So enforcement of a criminal sentence dependent of the judgment of the last appeal. Only then the case would be seen as we call in Brazil, transitado em julgado, or tried with no possibility of being appealed. Because of general systems of appeals and a heavy caseload of our superior courts, powerful defendants could manipulate the judicial process to prevent a case to reach an end, and so to avoid effective accountability. In complex criminal cases involving powerful defendants, it was very common until recently that you never saw a final decision, even in cases which have strong evidence of criminal behavior, and even in cases involving very serious crime. As a rule, these defendants in complex cases would never go to prison despite of the evidence. This rule, demanding a final decision, changed recently, but I will talk about this later. Another of the two main reasons, in my opinion, is a controversial privilege provided by Brazilian law for high politicians and high official authorities in criminal cases, what we call the foro privilegiado. In the Brazil judicial system, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over criminal charges involving high federal official authorities, like the President, the Vice President, Cabinet Ministers, and members of the Congress. So in a criminal investigation, if investigations produce evidence of criminal conduct by a federal congressman, for example, the judge has to send it to the Supreme Court. But our Supreme Court has a very heavy caseload, beyond any imagination here in US, something huge, strange for our Supreme Court. These heavy caseloads make it very difficult to have these criminal charges adjudicated in a timely way. as expected by the public. The consequence is sometimes a never-ending story for cases involving crimes committed by powerful defendants. In practice, the special jurisdiction of the Supreme Court over criminal charges involving high official authorities worked, as a rule, like a strong shield against the effective accountability of high federal official authorities. This is, in general lines, a description of, in my opinion, two main reasons for the weak enforcement of the law against crimes committed by powerful defendants. There are others, of course, but this is not the main subject of my presentation. Maybe things start to change in a famous criminal case decided by our Supreme Court 4 years ago, in 2012. In criminal case 407, also known in Brazil by Mensalão case, our Supreme Court convicted highly placed politicians, including a former chief minister of the federal government and several congressmen, political leaders, political parties operatives, and directors of some enterprise accused of bribery and money laundering. This verdict marked a clear break with a past of weak enforcement of the law against this kind of crimes. 2 years later came the Lava Jato operation. Lava Jato operation is not a single case. Its core is the Petrobras scandal involving bribes paid in multiple public contracts to close to 100 people, maybe more. For those who don't know, Petrobras is a big federally owned Brazilian company responsible for the exploration of oil and gas. It is our country's largest company and one of the world's largest oil companies. In this case, the prosecutors, here one of them, decide to pursue separate charges against dozens of defendants. So there is not a single accusation, but several. Part of them have already been tried, part are pending cases. I cannot say anything about the pending cases, but I can share some of my reflections involving the cases that have already been tried. As it usually happens in criminal investigation, Lava Jato started small. The federal police was investigating 4 individuals involved in money laundering conduct, especially in the money exchange black market. But one of these individuals had connections with a former director of Petrobras. In March of 2014, I authorized searches and seizures in the offices and house of these 2 individuals. When I learned from federal law enforcement officials that the former director of Petrobras had tried to destroy or to hide evidence from these searches and seizures, I ordered his pretrial detention. The person who money laundered for this director was also arrested in pretrial detention for different reasons. Looking at the banking records of these individual enterprises, the police and the prosecutors discovered that his accounts had received millions in credits from some of the biggest Brazilian construction companies. These companies were also major suppliers of Petrobras. And in another line of the investigation, it was discovered, with the assistance of Switzerland authorities, that that former director of Petrobras had millions of dollars deposited in offshore accounts in Swiss banks. This is where and how the investigation started. Facing long prison terms, these 2 individuals, the professional money laundering and the director of Petrobras, in the second half of 2014, decided to make plea agreements with the prosecutors. In summary, they revealed that, as a rule, in every contract Petrobras had with top Brazilian construction companies. These companies paid bribes or kickbacks of 1 or 2% of the total value of the contract. A share of the bribes went to politicians, including congressmen, which were part of the government ruling coalition. It seems that they received bribes because they support the director of Petrobras in his position, and he was a director, of course. These two individuals revealed also that other Petrobras officials had received bribes and had worked with intermediaries and politicians of other parties of the governing coalition. They also revealed that the Brazilian construction companies who paid the bribes were fixing between them the Petrobras bidding process. In resume, the suppliers of Petrobras decided between them which one would win each Petrobras contract. In practice, the chosen one could present a price proposition without real competition. They call themselves the club. The investigations continue to produce new evidence, including from plea agreements with other cooperating criminals. Looking at the cases already tried, there have been to date about 17 sentences which were specifically related to crimes of bribery in contracts involving Petrobras. In some of them, the persons convicted were top executives of the biggest construction companies, top executives of Petrobras, as well as intermediaries between these two groups. 4 former directors of Petrobras have been convicted and sentenced to prison terms. 2 of those decide, after serving part of their prison sentence, to cooperate with the investigation. All of them, all of these 4 former directors, they all have offshore accounts with balance of millions of dollars in countries such as Switzerland, Monaco, and Luxembourg, for example. In at least 5 cases, there were convictions of former federal legislators. As former federal legislators, they have lost their foro privilegiado, and then they could be tried in the first level of the judiciary. In 3 other cases, it was proven that money from the bribes had been directed to illicit financing of a political party. An interesting fact about these 5 former federal legislators who were convicted is that 2 of them had also received bribes in Mensalon cases. The investigation revealed that they received bribes from Petrobras scandal even during the trial of the Mensalon case. This fact was very disturbing. In one of the cases, a former senator was convicted for taking bribes in a very disturbing scenario. After the scandal of Petrobras became public, our Congress in 2014 decided to create a special investigation commission over the crimes. This senator was nominated vice president of the commission, but instead of doing the investigation, he took the opportunity to request bribes for some top executives who were under investigation. To illustrate the magnitude of this corruptive practice, a manager of Petrobras, after reaching a deal to collaborate, agreed to return nearly $100 million in bribes that he had received from Petrobras contracts and kept in secret in bank accounts abroad. The more troublesome aspect of the case was that it seems that the payment of bribes on Petrobras contracts was not an exception, but rather the rule. Some of the cooperating criminals use that word. They described the crimes they committed as a rule of the game in contracts of the public sector. Some of them also stated that this criminal practice went beyond what happened in Petrobras and was used by other federal companies and in other branches of the government. As I said, there are ongoing investigations, not only in my court, but also in other federal courts that received parts of cases. And dozens of highly placed politicians, especially congressmen, are being investigated by the chief federal prosecutor before the Supreme Court. Some of them have been charged already. All of these disturbing facts, especially the case already sentenced, allow us to conclude that an environment of system corruption was uncovered by the investigation. Corruption, as everybody knows, as an isolated crime, exists all around the world. But system corruption, the payment of bribes as a rule of the game, isn't that common, and it represents a severe degeneration of public and private customs, especially in democratic nations. The cost of system corruption is, of course, enormous. First, the cost of the bribes. The bribes are usually added by the bribe payer to the contract with the state-owned company or with the government. So they affect the public budgets. Imagine that this is not an isolated practice, but a general rule, and you will understand how it can affect the management of public resources. Moreover, the need to generate funds from bribes in system corruption schemes can affect investment decisions by public and private entities. Perhaps, maybe, some bad investments made by Petrobras in that period could be explained not simply as a result of a bad judgment or unlucky choice, but instead as a deliberate choice by corrupted directors of Petrobras to generate bribes rather than take the best decision from an economic point of view. Another detrimental effect of system corruption is that it chases away local and foreign investors. If the market is not clean and transparent, if bribes and cheating are the rule, a responsible investor will not have confidence in that market, and he will not put its money in it. But above all, system corruption is damaging because it impacts confidence in the rule of law and in democracy. If the law does not apply to everyone, there is a progressive erosion of trust in democracy. So, faced with a revelation of system corruption, what should be done? First, the judicial system must work. Crimes that are uncovered and proven, respecting due process, must be punished. Justice works when the innocent person goes home and the guilty person goes to prison. The outcome should not depend on the economic or the political conditions of the defendants. There is still much to be done to advance in this respect. The adequate functioning of the criminal justice system is a necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition to overcome system corruption. It's necessary that other public institutions, the executive and legislative branches, adopt public policies aimed at preventing and combating corruption. System corruption is not and cannot be a problem only for the judiciary. So better laws can be approved to improve the efficiency of criminal justice system and to increase the transparency and predictability of relations between the public and private sectors, reducing incentives and opportunities for corrupt practice. Freedom of the press and access to information is also essential. The control of those who govern by the governed demands citizens that are well informed about the management of public life. Since the beginning of the investigation, it was our decision that we would not hide any information or evidence from the public. And also, the Brazilian Constitution requires that the judicial process be open to public scrutiny. We cannot have cases prosecuted and tried in secret. Once the investigation is finished, everything, the prosecution, the evidence, the hearing of the witness, the judgments, and the sentence has been conducted under the light of sun. This is important, not because we want to judge these claims in the realm of public opinion or to manipulate public opinion. It's important to make these cases public, to prevent an attempt by powerful defendants to obstruct justice. Of course, in fighting systemic corruption, private sector initiative has also a relevant role. Corruption involves those who make the illicit payments and those who receive them. Both parties are guilty. So companies must do their homework, saying no to the payment of bribes, implementing mechanisms of internal control, and denouncing requests or demands. It's also important to act collectively so that companies involved in corrupt practice are identified and isolated from the market and not allowed to assume a prominent position. For this, there's a great example in a different scenario from some Sicilian companies. Some Sicilian companies refuse collectively to pay the so-called piso, the bribes to the mafia, and they join together in organizations like Adio Piso. I think it's very important to work collectively to avoid that the one who decide to pay bribes receive a better treatment than the others in the competition in the market or from the government. Maybe these Adio Piso movements could be an example. Of course, it's different, but it's a good example. Much can be done, and it's important to keep in mind that systemic corruption is a product of institutional and cultural weakness. No country has to live with systemic corruption. It's not a tropical disease, let's stay clear. Discovering and revealing it, even it generates impacts in the short term, is not part of the problem, is part of the cure. Perhaps more than any other case in the past, because of the dimension of the crimes that have been uncovered, Lava Jato operation provides Brazil with the opportunity to take the necessary steps to overcome this shameful practice. It's too soon to say whether that this will happen or whether corruption will be contained or reduced to a more reasonable size in Brazil. It's very difficult to make predictions. And of course, there have been reactions to Lava Jato. Some critics also have complained that Lava Jato operation is not impartial and has been used to play politics. That's not right. Of course, if the crime involves bribes paid to politicians, the case will inevitably have political consequences. But this happens outside the court, and the judge does not have control of it. Some critics also say the Lava Jato operation represents a criminalization of politics. But, to be honest, the blame should not be aimed at the judicial process, but rather blind eye in the face of these crimes. Some critics also say that due process is not being respected. I respectfully disagree. Every aspect of the judicial process is being conducted in open court with the respect of the rights of the defendants and based in extensive evidence obtained under the law. Lava Jato is not a witch hunt. The problem is that the evidence of corruption revealed by the investigation was so widespread that the case took giant proportions with numerous detentions and convictions. But nobody, let's say the truth, is being charged or convicted based in political opinion. Where there is evidence of illegal conduct, the accused are being charged and convicted not because of his opinion, political opinion, but for the bribery and the money laundering crime he committed. This is so much different. Coming to the end, it's possible to take some lessons from Brazil's situation. Years of weak enforcement of the law against crimes committed by powerful defendants have generated a free environment for the development of bribery, kickbacks, corruption, and money laundering. Probably it was not the main reason, but of course it did not help to prevent it. However, reality has presented Brazil with an opportunity to face systemic corruption. I read sometimes in newspapers, foreign newspapers, criticism against the systemic corruption uncovered in Brazil. The critics are correct. What has been exposed is indeed shameful. But there is another way to look at this picture. The crimes are becoming known because of the efforts by many Brazilians to face and fight the problem. The police, the prosecutors, and the judiciary are serious dealing with it. It's of course still an ongoing investigation, but some of the results of the cases already tried have no precedent in Brazil. We have several corruption scandals in our history, but never before Lava Jato top executives of the country's biggest construction companies were tried and convicted. Never before Lava Jato had a single director of Petrobras being charged of a crime. Today we have 4 of them convicted and serving prison terms. Several congressmen are being investigated and prosecuted before the Supreme Court. Some of former federal congressmen have been also been tried and convicted in the first level of the judiciary. I believe this is progress in the implementation of the rule of law in our country. And it has had beneficial collateral effects. In a possible positive collateral effect of the investigation of the Petrobras scandal, our Supreme Court overruled in 2016 a past decision that postponed indefinitely the execution of a prison sentence, as I mentioned in the beginning. Now the Supreme Court, Brazilian Supreme Court, understands that enforcement of a criminal conviction is permitted just after the sentence is affirmed by a court of appeal. So, we no longer have to wait for a final decision at the highest level of appeal, which, as I said earlier, can take an eternity. This is a kind of a judicial revolution in the enforcement of criminal law in complex cases in Brazil. This is already generating a great impact in several other cases about corruption. Our Supreme Court has clearly demonstrated with this new ruling that it fully understands the connection between systemic corruption and impunity. In another important case, our Supreme Court ruled against electoral contributions for companies. Brazilian electoral law allowed companies to make large contributions for elections without proper limits. Our Supreme Court understood that without safeguards, there would be a great danger of improper relations between companies and politicians and political parties, or quid pro quo donations. So in 2015, the Supreme Court ruled then void until proper regulations are approved. For these two rulings, I think it deserves a lot of compliments. It's also true that much more can be done. Until now, the police, prosecutors, and the judiciary have been the main protagonists in our nation's efforts against systemic corruption. So far, the executive branch and Congress have made no significant contribution in Brazil's efforts against corruption. Unfortunately, to be honest, there are some signs of reactions against the Lava Jato operation by the Congress. Last year, the federal prosecutors presented a bill with major popular support to improve laws against corruption. Despite the popular support, the House rejected the bill in the end of the last year, or at least the most part of the propositions. Maybe this could change, but it's very uncertain if the bill will approve it. What is more disturbing was an apparent attempt in the House to approve an amnesty bill for illegal electoral donations and even for bribery in cases that the bribes were paid in form of electoral donations. In another controversial act, the Senate last year tried to approve a new bill about abuses of power committed by judges, prosecutors, and policemen. Of course, nobody defends the abuses committed by an official authority. But at this moment, and considering the text of the bill, it could have a deterrence effect against the independence of the judiciary and the autonomy of the prosecutors and the police. It's still uncertain what will happen with the bill. The independence of the judiciary branch from special interests is fundamental for the rule of law. The independence of the judiciary has a long history. In Britain, the Act of the Settlement of 1701. In the US, the failure of the impeachment of the Justice Samuel Chase. In Brazil, the failure of a criminal prosecution against the state judge Alcides de Mendonça Lima in the end of the 19th century. They are all landmarks of the independence of the judiciary. The judge could not be punished for the interpretation of the law, even if it's controversial. Another setback for Lava Jato operation, and this is a very tragic one, Justice Teresa Vasque, who was responsible for the part of the case in our Supreme Court, died years ago in an air crash. This was very sad, not only because of the tragedy of a woman's life, but because he was a very able jurist and he had acted with great independence in his decision in Lava Jato operation, even when powerful special interests were involved. At least last week, another very respected justice of our Supreme Court, called Edson Fachin, was assigned to continue the work of Justice Teresa Vasque. Despite of the setbacks, it's important to highlight that last year and this year, last year and the year before, millions of Brazilians protested in the streets against corruption. Or on March 13 of last year, more than 3 million people occupied the streets in several state capitals and major cities of Brazil in peaceful demonstrations. It's true that these demonstrations were motivated by many causes, like dissatisfaction with the economy and with the former government. But it's also true that a common cause that united the demonstrators and the country was to rally in protest against systemic corruption and in support of Lava Jato operation. This attitude of our fellow citizens gives us great hope. The fight against corruption has definitely entered in Brazil's public policy agenda and will influence our political debates. Hopefully, some years from now, we will be able to look back and say that Lava Jato operation made the rule of law and democracy stronger in Brazil. Maybe we'll be able to say that systemic corruption was overcome and become a sad memory of the past. Obviously, we cannot take this for granted, but it's necessary to have some hope. I'm confident that at least we have a great opportunity to face and to solve this challenge. There is no challenge that could not be overcome in a democracy. To finish my presentation, I just want to read some words about corruption that I found in a famous speech of old President Theodore Roosevelt. I was doing some research about corruption in the US, and I discovered that Theodore Roosevelt had a strong agenda against corruption. At his time, he encouraged a strong enforcement of bribery federal laws in big corruption cases in Kansas and Oregon, which resulted in the unprecedented conviction of 2 US senators at that time. He also endorsed the Tillman Act of 1907 that forbade companies' donations for federal elections. So his speech sounded his acts, and that is much important. He delivered these strong words in a speech for the US Congress in 1903. Now I'm quoting. "There can be no crime more serious than bribery. Other offenses violate one law, while corruption strikes at the foundation of all law. Under our form of government, all authority is vested in the people and by them delegate to those who represent them in official capacity. There can be no offense heavier than that of him in whom such a sacred trust has been reposed, who sells it for his own gain and enrichment. And no less heavy is the offense of the bribe giver. He is worse than the thief, for the thief robs the individual, while the corrupt official plunders an entire city or state. He is as wicked as the murderer, for the murderer may only take one life against the law, while the corrupt official and the man who corrupts the official alike aim at the assassination of the Commonwealth itself. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, will perish from the face of earth if bribery is tolerated. The givers and takers of bribes stand on an evil preeminence of infamy. The exposure and punishment of public corruption is an honor to a nation, not a disgrace. The shame lies in toleration, not in correction. No city or state, still less the nation, can be injured by the enforcement of law. If we fail to do all that in us lies to stamp out corruption, we cannot escape our share of responsibility for the guilt. The first requisite of successful self-government is infringement, enforcement of the law and the cutting out of corruption. Here I end the quotation. I thank you very much for your attention. I'll be glad to answer your questions.
turned down? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Moro. It's a pleasure once again. Much has been discussed about like the consequences of the car wash operation for the very short run. Of course, we have this expectation about the future, this structural transformation of Brazil in order to have a better governance environment with stronger compliance inside the companies and everything. But in the very short run, we have seen like, as a consequence of this uncovering of these huge schemes of corruption in Brazil, this instability in the country. So how do you see this? Do you see this as a price to pay in the short run? Like, for example, the imbalance of power that we have seen, like the upheaval in the legislative, for example. We had an impeachment in Brazil that caused further political instability, not only due to the car wash operation, but it has played a role, intentionally or not. So how do you see this, in the very short run, all these consequences that we have seen in the country?
Well, the economy is important, and I think probably most of people agree that in the long term, Brazil will become a more competitive country in the market. The costs of public contracts in Brazil will be reduced. This fight against corruption will attract investors. But as you say, maybe in the short term, this brings some stability. But it's not all about economy. I think there are more choices that have to be made. And not only the judge, but every Brazilian, we could not turn a blind eye against this kind of crimes if they remain, if we don't do our job, if we don't do the right thing about these crimes. Of course, when there is evidence supporting the charges, we will lose confidence in the rule of law, in democracy, and that would be damaging for Brazil.
And what about all the talk that we have heard in Brazil about the politicization of the judiciary as an unintended consequence as well? Not in the sense that the judiciary is partisan, but in the sense that it has played a role in politics, unintended or not. So, for example, when you arrest politicians, leading politicians, people like former Senator Docido Amaral that was arrested as one of the consequences of one of the outcomes of the operation. So the Congress is putting upheaval, of course. The political establishment tries to fight back. Public opinion plays a role. People are informed about the car wash operation. The press plays a very important role in this process as well. So everyone is watching, and political consequences are brought about to the political scene, like for the public sphere in Brazil. So how do you see this? It's inevitable, but how do you deal this in your everyday activities in order to try to avoid not being directly involved in partisan politics?
Well, I have a great opportunity last year to meet Per Camilo da Vigo. He was a prosecutor in Manipolite operation in Italy. Now he is a judge in the Cassation Court in Italy. And once he said that if you want to stop the conflict between the criminal judge and the politicians could not commit crimes. So it's simple. The problem, our interference of the criminal justice in politics, it's because crimes are under investigation. Some of them proved, some of them have already been convicted. And the political consequence, this happened outside the court. The judge has not any discretionary power, and the prosecutors also, to not do his job. So if the prosecutors presented me with evidence of criminal conduct, if it involved the politicians, I have to decide over the evidence, just like that. And the political consequence, this is something that happens outside the court.
Okay. One last question before opening for the audience to raise their own questions is how do you see like the future of the future consequences, like the final outcome once it ends, that you don't know when it will end, but after it ends, what will be the legacy for Brazil? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about it? We have a stronger Brazil, stronger institutions, less corruption, or we'll have like a similar fate like in Italy with the clean hands operation there, with Brazilian Berlusconi taking over the country as a savior of the nation?
Yes, I think despite of Berlusconi, Italy is better now than it was before the Lava Jato operation. But of course, the reaction of the political system, I think it prevented Italy to have major reforms and a cleaner political life. And that's an example. I think the economy in Italy is not very good, and they could not blame anymore the manipulated operation because it is in the past. I think we have to be careful with predictions, but also we have to be optimists. So what have been done until now, I think it has a great importance. The question is if these efforts will be transformed in stronger institutions, not only the judiciary, but the Congress and the executive. But we have to have some faith about the future. And if we could overcome systemic corruption, I think there's reason to proud. Brazil has a beautiful history. Brazil is a country with a lot of problems, but where democracy is now strong. The Brazilians defeat military dictatorship in the past. We have problems with hyperinflation. And the Brazilians overcome it. I think in the last years we have concrete progress in the fight against absolute poverty. And maybe this fight against systemic corruption could be one day a reason for Brazilians to be proud of themselves. Because it's not the job of a judge, of several judges, of the prosecutors, of the police. It's a conquest of Brazilian democracy, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you for now, but we have like questions from the audience. So we have like microphone here. We'll take like 3 questions at once, and then Judge Moro will respond to these questions, and then if we have time, we will open again. So please be very short in your questions, very brief, just 1 minute at maximum, okay? Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Judge Sérgio Moro. I want to know if you were ever interested on a chair in the Supreme Court, and what do you think of the name of Alexandre de Moraes for the Supreme Court chair?
Two questions because of time.
Two questions.
So, a second question, and then...
Good morning. In 2009, the WikiLeaks has shown that in 2009 you participated in a seminar organized by the Department of State of the United States. Would you be able to tell us why and what was the content and what other seminars you participated? And also, as being saying in the press that you were not taking other cases other than car wash operation because it takes you a long time. You participate in a lot of public seminars, both in Brazil and abroad, every week. Would you think that if you participated in less public lectures about an ongoing investigation, you would have time for other cases?
Okay, next question.
Hi, Judge Moro. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for your tenure as a judge. My question, and I find it appropriate that you end with Theodore Roosevelt as a quote, has to do with antitrust law in Brazil, and specifically how corporations will play into corruption law as it is. You know, Theodore Roosevelt thought that private corporations themselves were one of the biggest detriments to a free society, and that's part of the whole history of the progressive era in the United States. And so, you know, considering that in the United States, you know, corporations are considered people as corporate entities, how do you think that corporations are going to fit into corruption laws, you know, not just through antitrust laws, but how do we prevent lobbying from becoming a dominant political force?
Okay, I'm very far from Brazil. I am not seeing all the news about what is going on. There is a vacancy in the Supreme Court, and the president have to make his choice. I would never make a campaign for me for Supreme Court, and I don't think I'll be chosen. But well, if he chooses the Minister of Justice, well, good luck for the Minister of Justice. But I don't have an opinion to share now.
What do you think of Minister Fachin to be the relator of Lava Jato?
I already said in my speech, he is a great jurist, and he is in the Supreme Court since 2015, I think. And he made important decisions that showed his independent justice. But I don't have the authority to evaluate a justice in the Supreme Court. But that's my opinion, my short opinion. And, well, about the... Well, I'm not every week in conferences abroad. Let me state that. About this course, in the Department of State have a program they call International Visitor Programs, and they made invitations all around the world to people to come to United States and to improve their knowledge in some areas. And at that time, I was invited to come here and have contact with some experts in money laundering, experts in a good way. For example, a friend here who is in the audience, a former district prosecutor who made a lot of efforts to bring a powerful politician of Brazil to justice, is here. And that time I made a visit and I talked with him, just that. And well,
why don't you take other cases? That was the last part of the question, was why are you refusing to take other cases like every other judge has to in Brazil, saying that you're too busy with this while you are participating in other courses and seminars and lectures?
Well, I understand our appeal court understood that this Lava Jato case is a giant case, and it's hard to work on it. So they have the possibility to decide that I'll only work in these cases and not in others. Simple like that.
Okay, let's take 3 more questions. Okay.
No, I don't think you answered.
Sorry, I did not answer. About the corporations. What is great in this case is that some of these corporations who were involved in bribes, in the beginning they fight a lot in the judicial process, sometimes with hard attacks on the prosecutors, on the police, and even on the judge. But some of them, because of evidence, start to recognize that they were responsible. And some of Brazilian biggest construction companies made lenience agreements with the prosecutors. And this is, I know that in US it's different, but in Brazil this is very new. And they agree to pay fines, billions in fines. They committed, they promised that they would reveal all the crimes. And they also, and I think this is important, they apologize for the Brazilian people. So they paid big advertisement in newspapers and say, well, we made a mistake. And I think this is the correct way of dealing with this kind of case. The reputation of an enterprise is more damaged when the corporation don't recognize its blame. It's not exactly an answer for a question, but it's a good example.
Okay, 3 more questions.
If I could just ask a quick follow-up.
Wait, let's try to circulate a little bit, because there's a line of people.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hi. Can I ask? Hi.
How
do you think that
thank you.
Sorry.
Well,
I don't know. Which one?
Decide and then decide.
Okay, no problem.
okay. But if you want to go first, no problem.
No problem.
Well, I would like to thank Columbia University for the opportunity of making questions. And I'd like to ask you, you ended quoting a U.S. president. I'd like your opinion about other U.S. presidents. And I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about the McCarthyism period. What do you think about this period in the history of the United States, comparing with the Brazilian situation? And I would like to give you the opportunity, knowing that in Brazil family matters a lot, to explain the relationship of your father and PSDB, and also explain the picture in which you appear cheek to cheek with Aécio Neves. And I think it's an opportunity to explain these things because Aécio Neves and Serra were quoted more than 40 times in the peer agreement, but they are not being persecuted. So I think this is a good opportunity for you to explain all these things that, for me, it's dividing the country. We have law and we have philosophy. Law is on the stage, but philosophy has long ago proved that all human action are not, it's impossible for a human action to be neutral. So explain. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one.
I'd like to know how the death of former First Lady Marisa Letícia, former President Lula's wife, this week could change your judge in Lava Jato.
Okay. The third one, this slide again.
Hi. You mentioned in your speech that it's important to share all the information about the criminal process to the society because it increases the accountability. But I'd like to know your opinion about the vazamentos, which means the information about the process that were released to newspapers and media before the end of the judicial process. And how do you think that those vazamentos can impact in the final decision in the process?
Thank you.
Okay, about McCarthyism, yes. Well, as I said in my presentation, nobody is being charged or convicted based in his public opinions, his political opinions. It's cases involving bribes. So has nothing, it's not similar than McCarthyism, it's completely different. I know that in this case involving politicians, sometimes it have political consequences, and sometimes the politicians try to defend themselves, saying that it's all about politics. But as I view, we are just doing our job, processing and trying the cases based on evidence. So we are not playing politics. As this case has these giant proportions, it's unfortunately common that sometimes people, well, invent stories about the prosecutors, about the judge. For example, some internet news said that my father had political connection. That never happened. My father, he's dead, but he never had any political connection. This is a totally lie. Okay, and I'm sad that they invented this story of a dead man to attack me. They attack only also my wife, saying that she had political connections. That's absolutely not true. So sometimes people have to take care of what they read in the internet and check the information. Bell, about the photo. Oh, okay, I was in a public event, and he was on my side. What can I do? And we talk, just that. But, well, he is not under my jurisdiction. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction, and I can assure you that we did not talk about the case. Just that.
Okay. Three more.
She asked about Marisa Letícia here.
Oh, okay. I will not give any comment about this. I don't think it's proper. Sorry, not your question, but not your question. I'm sorry to say that, but it would be improper to me to make a comment about this tragic event.
Okay, three more. Let's try the time here.
I think that you didn't answer my question.
Oh.
About the vazamentos.
Oh, the leaks. Well, leaks are against the law, okay? And what we have done in all the cases, as I said in my presentation, the Brazilian Constitution demands that we have trials in open court. And I think it's important in a democracy that people is informed about these crimes, because these crimes involve usually bribes, taking in the prejudice of the people. And also it's important that everything go public, because the people have the right to know what the prosecutors, what the police, what the judiciary is doing with these cases, in this case. A different thing is the leaks. So sometimes I understand that people make some confusion and think that because some serious, because of information of serious crime becoming public, that this is a leak. But sometimes it's not. In the most part of the cases, it's not. It's a decision to make all open to the public scrutiny. And the law in Brazil not only authorizes that, but demands that. Okay? But, of course, in a case of this dimension, there have been some leaks. And usually when something like this happens, the police try to discover. But this is a kind of ghost hunt. It's very difficult to discover who leaked the information to the press. Maybe the only way would be to lift the secret of the communications of the journalists. But we will never do that, because that would, in my opinion, violate the freedom of press. So it's very hard to discover who is responsible. But in a case that we have evidence about who did the leak, of course the person will answer for his conduct.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I have a final round here before going to the round table. So please be very short and
okay.
One more.
Judge Moro, thank you for your lecture. You've mentioned... I'm so sorry to say. Oh, it's okay. No problem.
Yeah, no problem for me. Okay. First of all, let me congratulate you about what you're doing your job in Brazil. I'm a politician in Brazil. I'm the former mayor of my city, Pelotas, in the very south of Brazil. And I think punishing corruption, of course, is a big challenge. But maybe we have collateral effects of how we are doing about it, because as judges and prosecutors doesn't have to be, shouldn't be afraid of prosecuting and judging. Public managers shouldn't be afraid of managing, of governing. And in politics, the good managers and I think I'm a well-intentioned politician, are afraid of governing, of managing. Every good and well-intentioned people that I invite to go to politics, to work with me, they say, well, I want to contribute, I want to to collaborate, but I'm very afraid of being judged, because it's not about only crimes. Any error, any fault in government can be judged and can end with the life of this person. So this is a big challenge to conciliate. How do you think we can conciliate things? Because these have consequence to the people if the government, if the governor is afraid of governing.
Thank you.
That's it.
Next question.
Judge Moro, you mentioned during your lecture the protest that took place in Brazil in March 2016. At that very time of the year, there was a leak, since we were mentioning that before, from a conversation between former President Lula and former President Dilma, which was later on considered illegal by the Brazilian Supreme Court. That audio came from the office where you work, and I'm sure you know the case. My question is, do you think, what is the measure of that leak to the consequence of the impeachment of President Dilma? And since that we have had this past month a very similar situation in which a minister was appointed by President Temer, and he had been mentioned in a car wash operation for 34 times, and we have not seen the same amount of political turmoil over that. So do you think that the Brazilian judicial system is treating equally both the former president and the current president? Thank you.
Thank you. And the final one, please. I'm so sorry for the other ones, but we have still around the table to go. And of course, everyone would like to raise questions. I think we have some representation of points of view. So I feel so sorry, but Sérgio Moro has his own time as well. He has to leave very soon to the airport again. So let us take the final question, and thank you.
Good morning. I'm here representing a dissent voice from the New School student community. My question is, during recent hearings, which were part of the car wash investigations, you did not allow the witnesses responded to the questions formulated by the lawyers of the former President Lula. The questions related to secretive international agreements that were signed recently between Brazil and US authorities. You argued that the questions from Lula's lawyers were irrelevant and could jeopardize the agreements in question. What were those agreements about? Do they relate to possible regulations for the explorations of oil fields of Pre-Sal? Did you participate in these agreements? Or were you informed in advance about the content of secret negotiations with American authorities? And finally, don't you think it's unethical for a judge to travel to the United States to comment on an operation which has not been concluded yet?
Well, the first is... Oh, yes, a very proper question. Well, I think that maybe, talking about the whole system, not more about Lava Jato operation, sometimes there's some exaggeration in process against not only politicians, but against the executive branch. Not federal, but federal, state, and in the cities. And we have to improve our practice in this area to have a clear separation between illicit behavior or criminal behavior and divergences in the conduction of the administration of budgets or cities or states or the federal government. But returning to Lava Jato operation, these cases involve the cases already tried, bribes. And when people see that some politicians, and even maybe politicians that he elected with his own vote, they became, they start to see politics are as something dirty. And this is damaging for politics. So it's important to clean, I think, the system, so people could be more, how I can say, they could think that if he joined politics, he will not become a criminal or something like that. But I agree in part with what you said. I think sometimes it's a little bit too much in the interference of prosecutors or judges in the business of the other branches, but not in criminal conduct. About the other was about the leak. Oh, so that's example. It was not a leak. It was my decision to make that evidence public. I already stated my reasons to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, as far as I understand, only understand that it have the authority to lift the secrets of that evidence, but not that it should not be done, in my comprehension. It followed that rules that I said earlier, that we would not hide any evidence from the public in these cases. Okay? And about the political consequence, as I said, this happened outside the courts. I don't feel any responsibility for the impeachment of the former president Dilma Rousseff, for example. Don't have anything to do about that. I was only doing my job to protect the case against obstruction of justice in several situations. And I don't remember the...
I can ask them again.
Ah, no, I remember. Not necessary, sorry.
Good.
Well, as I said, there is a lot of misunderstanding, and this is strange, but sometimes it seems that some people think that I'm a kind of CIA agent. Well, I like the United States. I think it's a great country. Of course, as Brazil, the United States have its own problems. But you could not rely on conspiratory theories about Lava Jato. There is no evidence about anything like that. And then sometimes, to be honest, and sorry to say that, sometimes sound like crazy. Okay? But
I hope you didn't imply that my question was crazy, because so far you haven't answered the question, so I'm just waiting for that specifically question that I asked.
And about what happened in the court, in the hearing, as in U.S., the judge have supervisional power about what the lawyers, the prosecutors, the defense could or not could done. And I will not comment the specific case, but it's not uncommon that a judge in a court says to a lawyer or to prosecutors or to the defense that it's an improper question. Simple like that.
So you refrain from answering my question of whether this had to do with the press-al and what the meetings, or I'm sorry, the agreements were about?
What is that?
Can you repeat?
The specific question of what the agreements were about and whether they related to the press-al.
The case is related to press-al.
Should I ask the same question again?
No, I think I already answered. Sorry.
Okay. So we'd like to thank you, Mr. Moro, for accepting the invitation to come here. We know you are very busy for all these cases, and he accepted the invitation. So once again, on behalf of the two universities that organized the event, thank you very much, and a round of applause for our guests. We are going immediately to the round table. Mr. Moro is here as well, so we'll have some discussion about the economic impacts of the car wash operation. Please keep seated to the immediate discussion that follows with Professor Marcos Trujillo from Columbia University.
Você acompanhou com exclusividade aqui na TV Antagonista o pronunciamento, a palestra de Sérgio Moro na Universidade de Colômbia, em Nova York, nos Estados Unidos, na Universidade Columbia, em Nova York. Vamos fazer um resumo agora. A gente veio aqui pelo chat que a maioria de vocês acompanhou em inglês super bem, mas vamos fazer um resumo do que Sérgio Moro falou. Sérgio Moro começou fazendo um resumo do que é o caso Lava Jato para essa plateia. Aí a primeira consideração que ele fez é que há um fato triste, que duas pessoas que estão no caso Lava Jato, o que ele considera um cenário muito preocupante, já estavam no caso do Mensalão e que, enquanto processadas pelo caso Mensalão, elas estavam recebendo propina da Petrobras no caso Lava Jato. E isso é algo que mostra a fragilidade do sistema de justiça do Brasil, que mesmo enquanto essas pessoas estavam sendo processadas, elas estavam recebendo propina. Aí ele disse também que essas informações que estão sendo colocadas para o público, por exemplo, essas informações que muitas vezes a gente ouve nas redes sociais, que são vazamentos, isso não são vazamentos. Ele disse que há uma opção clara da equipe da Lava Jato por tornar esse processo o mais público possível. E por que ele diz? Porque é um processo enorme, que envolve pessoas muito poderosas. E ele acha que dar publicidade ao processo, não o juiz Sérgio Moro acha, diz ele que a equipe toda da Lava Jato chegou a essa conclusão, que dar publicidade ao processo é a melhor forma de prevenir qualquer tentativa de obstrução da justiça por essas pessoas poderosas. Sérgio Moro falou também sobre a tentativa de politização que se diz do judiciário. E ele dá uma explicação bastante interessante. Ele diz que não há politização, mas que é inevitável que a opinião pública fale sobre essas questões quando é um processo que envolve políticos e que envolve propina, que sempre haverá esse tipo de defesa na esfera da opinião pública. Mas ele foi muito claro ao dizer, ninguém aqui foi condenado por sua opinião ou sua posição política. As pessoas estão sendo condenadas por suborno e por lavagem de dinheiro. Outra acusação que se faz é que as pessoas não estão tendo respeitado o que se chama em inglês de due process of law, o devido processo legal. Essa é uma acusação feita muito pelos petistas contra Sérgio Moro e que ele rebateu em sua palestra na Universidade Columbia. Sérgio Moro falou também das reações que já acontecem por parte dos políticos para tentar barrar a Lava Jato. A primeira das reações que ele diz foi aquela muito forte do Congresso Nacional que a gente viu no ano passado, nesse movimento que foi feito para barrar o projeto das 10 medidas contra a corrupção, que não é um projeto do Judiciário, é um projeto do Ministério Público Federal, que no fim se tornou um projeto de lei de iniciativa popular. Aliás, você que assiste a TV Antagonista, pode ver, tá no nosso canal, uma entrevista exclusiva com Onyx Lorenzoni dizendo que as 10 medidas contra a corrupção não morreram, voltarão agora em fevereiro. A retaliação contra as 10 medidas, segundo Sérgio Moro, é uma retaliação direta contra a Lava Jato. Ele disse também que os políticos se organizando para tentar passar uma absolvição do Caixa 2 na calada da noite é uma medida de como eles se movimentam após a Lava Jato. Sérgio Moro falou ainda da morte de Teori Zavascki. Disse que foi uma grande perda, fez uma espécie ali de homenagem ao magistrado, dizendo que era um magistrado muito hábil e que é uma perda, não só a perda da parte, a perda humana, a perda do colega e a perda também das mulheres que o acompanhavam no voo, do amigo que estava com ele no voo, mas também uma perda para a Operação Lava Jato de um juiz equilibrado que conduzia esse processo tão difícil. Sérgio Moro diz que tem uma esperança de que a gente consiga superar essa tradição que o Brasil tem de corrupção e que um dia essa estrutura corrupta se torne apenas uma memória triste do passado. Mais uma vez, como faz sempre que pode nas redes sociais, Sérgio Moro terminou seu discurso citando Theodore Roosevelt. E nessa citação de Roosevelt, agora ele fala de uma parte em que Roosevelt escreve sobre o quanto a corrupção é um crime muito mais grave do que os outros, porque não é um crime que fere apenas um indivíduo, é um crime que fere de morte a sociedade e que abala as estruturas do Estado e a estrutura da confiança na sociedade. Em seguida da sua palestra, Sérgio Moro foi chamado a responder perguntas e ele respondeu perguntas ali, perguntas algumas favoráveis e outras nem um pouco. foi perguntado sobre a morte de Marisa Letícia e disse que não se sentia à vontade, achava que era indelicado se pronunciar. Foi perguntado se se sentia culpado pelo vazamento da conversa entre Dilma Rousseff e Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, aquela conversa do Bessias, e que isso teria culminado com o impeachment da presidente Dilma. Sérgio Moro disse que não, que ele não se sente culpado, que estava apenas fazendo o trabalho dele, impedindo a obstrução da justiça, e que aquilo não é um vazamento. Sérgio Moro alertou que muitas vezes as pessoas dão o nome vazamento para algo que não é vazamento. É uma publicidade legítima dentro da lei de um crime grave. Vazamento não é o que o juiz decide tornar público. Vazamento é aquilo que fica público sem a permissão da justiça, que alguém passa por baixo do pano para os jornalistas e diz que não se sente culpado pelo impeachment de Dilma Rousseff, que ele estava apenas fazendo o trabalho dele. Reclamou também que as pessoas inventam histórias sobre ele, como, por exemplo, aquela em que as pessoas inventaram que o pai dele tinha um envolvimento político, sendo que nunca teve. Falou também sobre a questão da politização da justiça e disse que a única maneira para que os juízes e os políticos parem de ter brigas, parem de colidir, é que os juízes que os políticos parem de cometer crimes. Enfim, para finalizar, foi feita uma pergunta sobre o envolvimento de Sérgio Moro com os Estados Unidos e ele até fez uma brincadeira dizendo que muitas vezes imaginam que ele é um agente da CIA, mas que ele não é, que essas teorias conspiratórias podem parecer muito malucas. Enfim, você viu aqui pela TV Antagonista, com exclusividade, a transmissão ao vivo da palestra de Sérgio Moro na Universidade Columbia, nos Estados Unidos. Logo mais, na edição das 4 da TV Antagonista, a gente vai fazer um resumão com os principais trechos da fala de Sérgio Moro. A TV Antagonista, você já sabe, está com você todos os dias, às 10 da manhã e às 4 da tarde, no www.oantagonista.com e no youtube.com/oantagonista. Até já, tchau!